Hello and welcome to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi. I'm the principal attorney. Today's review is going to be on cookies. So we're going to be looking at cookies belonging to The Guardian. So this is the banner that has been presented in relation to the sale of personal information. The interesting verbiage here is that California residents have certain rights with regard to the sale of personal information to third parties. So what this sentence gives me an indication of is, at a minimum, this organization is going to be processing the personal data of California residents. I've talked a lot in this channel about geography. Now, many times when we do these reviews, we don't have insight into geography, but now I'll be able to make some opinions about some of the language that is utilized in the cookie policy here, because they've identified at a minimum that they are going to process California residents' personal data. Now, the California privacy legislation, the CCPA, as amended by the CPRA, influences how organizations can process personal data for California residents. Now, as it currently stands, there's over 20 states in the United States that have their own US state privacy legislation. Now, we're not even talking about privacy legislation on the federal level or on the state level. And for anybody that's of an international audience and is not in the United States, the distinction I've made between federal privacy and state privacy is because federal privacy dictates how personal data can be processed in certain instances on a federal level, meaning if you meet the thresholds based on those federal laws, then you have obligations under those federal privacy laws. US state privacy law is a little bit different. The obligations that a business has are in relation to what the thresholds that must be met in those geographies. For example, under the CCPA, we've got California that dictates that if you are going to process the personal data of a California resident based on these thresholds, then you need to adhere. These are the list of rules and things that you have to do if you're going to process our California residents' personal data. In some geographies, the threshold is that the person is within that geography, meaning they're in that country. They don't necessarily need to be a resident. And that's why the language in the law is very important, and also making an inventory of the countries in which you process personal data, because the laws are not the same. So I don't want to spend too much time on that because this is a cookie review, but I highlighted this because it's two notices. The first notice here is in relation to the obligations this company has related to selling personal data. One. Then we've also got the insight related to cookies, which is what we were going to talk about. We've got the notice that says they use cookies in some forms to improve experience on our site and pages. Okay, there's 2 points. You can find out more about privacy and cookie policy and manage your choices by going to California resident do not sell at the bottom of the page. I'm interested, and we're actually going to check this out, whether this opportunity to manage our choices are not exclusive just to California residents, but also to visitors of the site and pages, which is displayed in this notice here, because there's two things we're looking at. We're looking at the sale of personal information for the California residents, and then we're also looking at the cookies improving the site. And I am not a California resident, but I am still a person whose personal data is being collected. And as such, I should have choices as it pertains to the cookies that are collected when I interact with the sites which I'm on right now. So thank you for the notice. We're going to go to the bottom and manage our choices. So we've got the button that they told us about here. Now this is very interesting. I want to talk about The Guardian. The Guardian is a very popular newspaper in the United Kingdom. Now, I don't live in the United Kingdom. I am from England, but don't live there. And so the call out that I wanted to make here is I'm very interested about this privacy setting for a number of reasons. One, there is a discussion for California residents, and this is theguardian.com. Now, I'm highlighting this URL because I'm not sure if The Guardian presents a different website in the United Kingdom. Now I'm going somewhere with the geographies. I'm just saying because I'm surprised that the only preference that we're able to manage on this theguardian.com site is in relation to do not sell or share my personal information. Whereas when we saw the banner before, there was insight related to cookies, but we don't have the opportunity to manage those settings too. I'm not going to address this because it doesn't pertain to me. I don't live in California and I'm not a resident. So we're just going to cancel this and go back to the cookie statement. But I did want to demonstrate how important geography is first and foremost, because of the representations and flow that companies have on their site. Let's talk about scope. This cookie policy for Guardian News and Media Limited, okay, our site, The Guardian, and our associated apps. This is the cookie policy for this site, which I'm on, and I'm not a California resident. Some of our other sites and services have their own cookie policy. So this is why I mentioned geography at the beginning. because the obligations a business has vary based on the legislation that applies to them. I never have any of that context when I review these, but there are some underlying privacy principles that apply irrespective of privacy legislation. A privacy principle that we know about is notice. That is in every geography. Another privacy principle we know about is transparency, being transparent about your privacy practices. That is in every geography in some iteration. And that's really what we're looking for here. The notice that we were presented talked about cookies and obligations to California residents. And we can see here that we have rights. Even at a minimum, California residents have rights as it pertains to how cookies are collected based on their interaction with the site, because we know that at least one of the geographies is in the United States. But I highlighted this sentence because it says here, some of the sites and services have their own cookie policies. It may be that organizations are choosing to have different sites that address their obligations under the privacy laws in those countries. As I said, the laws differ, but I think it's valuable to identify scope every single time, whether it's a cookie notice, privacy policy, cookie policy, any type of privacy documentation. Scope is very important, as is identifying the legal entity responsible for the processing. Why is this important? Because I have rights. If I wanted to reach out to this company based on my interaction with the site and I had questions, oh, okay, what about that cookie banner? What about my rights as a US resident? How can I exercise those rights? I need to know who to contact. And that's why it's really important to identify who the organization is. And sometimes this is not clear in all of the public-facing privacy documentation. Let's go down to how they use cookies. Let's talk about the types. They've got here strictly necessary performance and functionality. Now, one thing I thought was interesting is, let's scroll down. How can you control these advertising cookies? You can manage the use of your cookies if you read The Guardian from free or subscribe to Guardian Ad Lite, including personalized cookies. Okay, so they basically say by clicking the privacy settings link in the footer of every page of our site. Okay, let me go down because I didn't see that. All right, so I'm not entirely sure, but this is why it's really important to reconcile what your document states and what is happening in practice. So let's go back and reread it. If you reside anywhere in the world except California or the US, you can exercise control over cookies by clicking the privacy settings link in the footer of every page. Now, I think one thing that's very interesting is this. I've spent a lot of time for this review talking about geography. Interestingly enough, if you are anywhere else in the world, if I had turned my VPN on, I would have been able to exercise my control over the cookies by clicking the privacy setting. So my question is, if you are located in the US, please use the California resident do not sell button instead. But how do US residents exercise their own preferences, because we have rights too? So that's very interesting, the layout. But again, there's so many details that are missing. But I think the value for this particular review is understanding why geography matters so much and how businesses can understand what their obligations are geography to geography. If you're going to process personal data in another geography, what are your responsibilities, and then implement them. If you are operating or providing your products and services in one geography, are you going to choose to have a completely different site that addresses your obligations there? And we can also see they've also addressed Australia as well. I am interested in why California or US residents are only being presented with do not sell button, even though cookies are being collected on residents outside of there, and we should have the opportunity to exercise our own cookie preferences as well. So that's very interesting. But I think it's good to do these observations and look at what organizations are doing. If you have comments about what I've stated, leave a comment below and I'll see you in another one.